You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Thanks for adventuring with us as we discover what incredible athletes and outdoor enthusiasts are doing all over the world. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hey friends, thanks for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast today. I have one quick announcement before we dive into today's program. We have Adventure Sports Podcast stickers again. Yes, the stickers are back. People loved them when we had them before. These are 2-inch stickers, great for putting on gear, water bottles, whatever you would like. It helps you to make sure you know what your stuff is when you're in a big group. If you would like some Adventure Sports Podcast stickers, just email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Give us a mailing address. We'll send you a handful of stickers. Now, if you would like more stickers, let us know how many you need. Maybe you have some sort of an event or something you want to share them. That's fantastic. Let us know. Just email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Give us a mailing address, which we won't abuse, by the way. And we'll send you a handful of stickers. It's just our way of saying thank you for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Now, on with the show. I have Alonso Rodriquez back with us, and that's Alonso with an S. I want to point that out. We were talking about highlining, which is like slacklining only over vast distances and way up there. And we did that recently on episode 1184. But if you heard the episode, you know that the last end of the episode got cut off. So I thought I would have Alonso back on, not just talk about highlining, but he also, he does a lot of rock climbing, he does rope jumping, and he makes tree nets. And I'm curious to hear what the tree net gig is all about. So Alonso, welcome back to the Adventure Sports Podcast.
It's great to be back, and hopefully we don't lose the episode this time. I'm filming in my house now. It's not under remodel anymore, rather than a Starbucks, and I think that's kind of where the issue stemmed from. Was that we filmed, and then I left the Starbucks, so I didn't have Wi-Fi anymore, and then I think that caused the catastrophe of not having downloaded the episode.
Yeah. Somehow we lost part of it, but that's okay. You're back, and I wanted to refer people back to episode 1184. Walking on air is what we called it, and it really looks like you're walking on air. I mean, if you're standing on the ground looking up, you're hundreds and hundreds or even more feet up, and the line you're on is so small, and you're going for like a kilometer across this vast expanse. It's just one of the most amazing visuals that I've ever seen. It looks literally like you're walking on air.
That's what it feels like. It definitely feels that way.
Well, it's a super cool episode. Everyone go back and listen to it. The part that we lost, we're not going to try to rebuild all of this, but we talked a little bit more about the engineering behind it, I think, before. We talked about the way that the wind would push a person around. And just for fun, Alonso, will you give us some of the stats on some of the really big lines that you've done, just so people know what we're talking about? How long, how high, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so me personally, the longest line I've ever done with my close friends, there were about like 10 to 15 of us over the course of a week. We put up a 1.35 kilometer line out in the Mojave Desert. 1.35 kilometers is like close to 5,000 feet. It's like just shy of a mile.
Wow.
I want to say like 4,800 feet or something like that. And that was, well over 600 feet high. But, the height, when you have a line that long, it honestly doesn't even matter anymore, because you're just out in such a big space that you just, you can't even really feel the exposure, because you're just like so far out there that is, like you said, you're walking in the sky, we're walking on air, so it doesn't matter which direction you look, you're just so far from anything that height just becomes like another thing out there.
That's crazy. It's such an amazing sport. It's not something that you see a lot of. I guess it's gaining popularity these days. How many people are doing this?
Well, man, when I first joined the sport 8 years ago, so we actually have a Facebook group. It's called Slack Chat for anybody interested in learning more about the sport. It's literally where every slackliner in the world is. Anyone that has Facebook and Slacklines, they're on Slack Chat. So if you wanted to ask about any kind of slacklining information, like where to go, how to start, things like that, you go to Slack chat, and they tell you how many members are on that page. So that's kind of what I used as like how many people slackline. And I remember when I first joined, it was something like 9,000 people. I'm curious what it would be today, though. That was like 7 years ago. I bet it's doubled since then, and we're probably at closer to like 20,000 people now.
Well, and that's slacklining as well, not just highlining.
Yes, correct. If you want to just take highliners, we're probably somewhere between like 5 to 10,000. I'd be surprised if there were more than 10,000 people actively highlining, like
Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. Like I don't think you can count people that have like tried it once, or that did it like 10 years ago and don't do it anymore, kind of thing, right? Like active highliners, I'd say somewhere between 5 to 10,000.
Well, it is a remarkable thing. I often ponder how humans will take any technology, any sport, to its absolute limits. And we just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. It's just in our nature somehow. And I think about some of I watch the Red Bull downhill mountain biking stuff. Huge drops that would kill you if you weren't on a bicycle. And it's crazy to think about how 2 wheels and some rubber make it possible to do something superhuman. Highlining is almost like that, only I think it's a lot safer. It doesn't feel safer, I'm sure.
I was about to say, I was like, I don't know if you can compare the two. The bike one is definitely 1,000 times more dangerous. So I like to tell people that our sport, like it. Don't get me wrong, it can be very serious. Like you're walking on a piece of webbing high up. If you do something wrong and your webbing breaks or you forget to tie your leash, which, believe it or not, is the most common cause of death in the sport. You will die because you're so far up. But it's one of those sports that has very low probability of injury, but the times where you do get injured or something like that, it's like pretty high consequence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I call those binary sports.
It's a binary sport. There you go.
It's like skydiving without a reserve. But you do have a reserve because you put up 2 lines. You have what do you call it? Some sort of a trailer that follows you. It's just, you had a word for it.
The leash, yes.
Yeah, well, the device that's on the second line is what I was trying to... Yeah, you have the leash device. And you have a...
So there's actually no device on the second line. It's literally just 2 lines taped together. Okay. And the second line is rigged loose, so you see all the loops.
Right.
And that does 2 things. So that, obviously, it provides backup in case the main line breaks for some crazy reason. Doesn't happen often. Like, I don't want people thinking that, a mainline failure in highlining is as common as like a main parachute failure in skydiving, right? Those are 2 very different
completely
things.
Different.
Yeah. Like when you hear people having their main parachutes fail in skydiving, they're just kind of like laugh about it, and they're like, "Oh, the reserve worked. Good for you," But like when we have a mainline failure in highlining, it's a very big issue. It's not like something that just kind of gets like, well, the backup caught you, you're good, No, like we don't like to use our backups, but they're there for when we need.
Have you ever had a line break while you're on it?
I have had a line break, actually, but we made a very dumb, in hindsight, decision. We were actually rope jumping. We weren't highlining, and we messed up some of the engineering on the project, and thankfully we had our backup. Otherwise, we wouldn't have one of our people today. So,
wow,
yeah.
And Alonso is an engineer. Went to engineering school. I don't know if you are. I would say you're employed as an engineer right now, right?
I actually haven't worked as an engineer, and I just hit a year actually on February 21st.
Wow, that's great. I guess, is that what you want?
Yeah. It was a choice. It wasn't like I got fired or anything.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it helps with the stuff that you do. Okay, you just mentioned rope jumping, and if people want to know more about walking on air, then again, go back to episode 1184. But let's talk about rope jumping. What on earth is that?
Man, yeah, so rope jumping comes from a long time ago. So back in the day in Yosemite, there was a guy named Dan Osman, almost everybody, even people that don't climb, know about this guy. He was the crazy climber who, he did a bunch of climbing without ropes, and I think that became not extreme enough for him. So what he started doing was he started taking climbing ropes and anchoring them to the tops of cliffs, and he would feed himself like so much slack, like sometimes up to like hundreds of meters of slack, and then jump off the cliff tied to the other end of the rope. So he'd free fall up to like 200 meters before that rope caught him. It was basically like think of it almost like a DIY bungee jump, really, with
Right.
climbing ropes.
Holy cow. So people are familiar with the bungee jumping. It's at the state fair, and it's at the nearest canyon with a bridge, right, has a bungee jump these days. But rope jumping, okay, first of all, everyone needs to know this. We're talking about dynamic ropes. They do have a little bit of stretch. That's what makes it possible. Otherwise, the rope might snap and you would certainly die at the end of it. But with a dynamic rope, you can do a jump, a big jump, and be okay.
Yeah. For the most part, you still have to be well supported. Like, if it's a big enough jump, you don't want to be just tied into a harness. You also want a chest harness so that, the force that your body experiences at the bottom is pretty even throughout. Otherwise, you got to have a really strong core to not kind of hurt your back a little bit.
Oh, yeah. A little bit.
A little bit. I've never strained my back personally, but I know people with less core strength or heavier guys, they've had little strains. Yeah, and I'm excited to dive into this, but before we dive into it, I do want to say that rope jumping can be safe. If you're doing more of an arc, an actual swing, rather than a free fall kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in Yosemite, it's actually Yosemite particularly, because Moab, there's a lot of swings in Utah and the Canyonlands and arches and stuff, right? Those are swings. Those are we kind of call those ropes swings because there's a lot more of a swing than a free fall, right?
Yeah.
But when we're doing it in Yosemite, we call it rope jumping because it's a lot more of a free fall than a swing. And what I'd like to say about this, because I was telling you before we started that we had that tragic accident in Arches National Park where they didn't measure their rope length correctly. I want to say that rope jumping, when you're doing it more free fall than swing, is definitely technically not a safe thing to be. Whenever we go rope jumping, we are definitely pushing the gear past its working load limit. We're not quite pushing it to the braking strength, but there's many cases where, if you got a 200-pound plus guy jumping, where he's going to reach over 50% of the main webbing's braking strength. So, you never really want to be hitting that on a normal scale. So whenever we're out doing these things, we we're very aware it is an extreme thing where you're not just pushing the sport anymore, but you're also pushing the limits of the gear a little bit. So we're retiring this gear a lot more often than we would for just normal wear and tear and highlining or climbing. We're, double, triple checking, making sure we have everything rigged correctly and that nobody's gonna strike a cliff. And it definitely just even feels when you watch your buddy go over the cliff and you just see them tumbling toward the earth at full gravity acceleration, it's a scary feeling.
I think that's an understatement, Alonso. A scary feeling. It terrifies me just to think about it. So there's something that people who are not climbers need to know about ropes, and that is that they're dynamic, but if you take a hard fall on a rope, then it loses some of the ability to stretch. And they don't stretch that much anyway, maybe 10%. I mean, it's not a lot.
I think it's closer to 25 or 30 under working load limit forces.
Okay.
So it can be a bit, but yes, you're right. They stay kind of stretched, and they don't always fully reset that quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, if you were to try this onto an old rope that doesn't stretch right anymore, I would think that would be not only now would there be more force that you're going to encounter at the bottom, but you're also working with something that a lot of its strength comes from its ability to stretch. So it loads the rope a lot more if it can't stretch as much. I mean, there are just so many considerations.
True. And here I'm gonna give you one more thing actually that I forgot to mention here. So we're not just jumping onto a rope, right? Because think of this: if you have a rope attached to the cliff that you're jumping off of, right? And you jump off that same cliff, what's gonna keep you from striking that cliff at the bottom of the jump, right?
Yeah.
So what we actually do, at least in Yosemite, we rig a highline out in the gap first, and the rope is actually connected to the middle of that highline. So, you don't just have the rope stretching anymore, but you also have the slack line stretching, and it becomes a whole system, which does make it safer because you get a lot more stretch because, you get like double the stretch basically of what you would with just a rope. But it adds a lot more complications because you're not now just like worrying about the ropes. You're also worrying about the high line and the clearance, and you got to make sure the point of where the ropes are attached on the high line is like perfectly centered, so you kind of swing out into the gap and you don't strike that rock like out to your right or whatever.
I think one of the hardest things for rock climbers when they first get into the sport, or rappelling even, is learning to trust the gear, learning to trust the rope's really going to catch you. I don't know. I'm just going to be really transparent, Alonso. I don't know if I could ever trust a rope enough and a high line enough to jump. I know it can. The numbers work out. People do it. But personally, I don't know if I would overcome that.
If it makes you feel better, we, our pioneer, Dan Osman, that I was talking about earlier, he died doing this sport. And the reason he died, there's a lot of rumors, but to my interpretation, the thing that happened was, he left his rope up there over like, a cold, like snow time or something like that. Maybe it was just cold in general, but he let it like go through some weather cycles for like a couple, I don't know if it was a couple weeks, days, or months, but like he left his stuff up there and he went up to retrieve his stuff. He was just going to go up there to like take it down. And, once he got up there, he was like, well, you know what? It's already set up. I'm just going to give it one more jump before I take it down. And the rope snapped. That was his last jump. And, the speculation is that, it was up there in the sun, breaking down in the UV, and like, all these weather and the elements on his gear had just like worn it down enough to where, like said, wasn't really rated for that kind of fall anymore. So we learned from that, right? Like tragic accidents are like one of the best ways to learn as a community. And, we're not using single ropes when we jump anymore. We do the same thing that we do with highlining now, where like, one of the ropes is like the tight one that's like supposed to catch us. And then we rig another one with like an extra like 5 meters of slack in it just as a backup in case the main one breaks for whatever reason.
So the backup, you have a backup on your high line as well.
Yep.
And so, I mean, there's a redundancy everywhere there.
Yep.
You could begin to think of this as safe, mathematically anyway.
Yep. And then also, we're beefing up the highline systems. Like, we're using a stronger webbing than we normally would, like for a regular highline setup, because there's like performance webbings that are like, still very strong, but like not as strong as like a very beefy like nylon or polyester webbing, because there's definitely like different thicknesses of webbing that are like stronger, but like, when they're thicker and stronger, they're harder to walk. So like you kind of have to like pick what you want. And obviously like when we're ropes jumping, we don't really walk the line anyway. So we're going to pick like a nice beefy, strong material.
Okay. So, Alonso, describe it to us. Take us there. We've been dancing around this idea. People are probably getting a picture. But what's it really like to do this?
Man, it is... So I do a lot of things, I rock climb, obviously, a lot. I highline a lot. I even did a bunch of skydiving in my day. Like, I've got 50 jumps under my belt in my lifetime. And I can confidently say that as far as like a fear, as far as like a fear factor goes, nothing even comes close to rope jumping. Like nothing I've ever done comes even close to rope jumping. Like
I
jumping
believe
out of a
you.
plane, not nearly as scary. If you've ever jumped out of a plane, I would say jumping out of a plane is like a 3 if jumping off a cliff attached to a rope is a 10. It's
Wow.
it's terrifying because you're like you step up, you're tied into these ropes, right? So like let's go there. You're tied into some ropes and you gotta like muster the will to like stand on the edge of the cliff, right? And like keep in mind these ropes are heavy. They don't weigh nothing. So you got like 30, maybe 40 pounds of weight pulling you into the void that you have to like hold on to, So like you got like,
Oh,
imagine someone
goodness.
like pushing you with like 30 pounds off the cliff, right? And you're just kind of have to stand there anyway and like fight it. So you're standing there with like 30 pounds, like wanting to pull you into this void. And you're like looking down and, the ropes are rigged level with us usually, if not a little bit higher. So you see this giant arc go down into the void and then across and up to where you rigged it on the other side, and it looks long. You're like, that is a lot of rope. And then your heart starts beating, and then everyone there. It's usually like a lot of people there, like 10 plus people, and for most first timers, it's really hard for them to want to commit to jumping, so they need a countdown. It's like it's just become like a tradition where like everyone counts down. And so you say you're ready, and then like whoever's the lead organizer starts a countdown. They go, okay, 10, and then like you got like 20 people all chanting like a countdown. And oh man, the second you leave the cliff and you feel the acceleration and like your heart's up in your throat, it's scary. The very first time I did it, I screamed the whole way down and instantly lost my voice. Is the most absurd thing. Like I couldn't speak after I came up. Is terrifying.
Yeah, I believe you. I mean, when I say it that way, I mean, you say it's scary. I'm like, yeah, no, that that would terrify me. That is nuts. So once you swing out, you're on the rope now and on the high line. How do you get down?
So in Yosemite, we don't go down. We come back up because down is still like another 200 meters in most cases, and up is only like like usually around 70 meters. There's a couple ways to do it actually. So if you wanted to do it the most bare bones way, you just ascend the rope. You take some climbing gear down with you, like the same like ascenders and some like nylon ladders and stuff, and you spend the next like 30 to 40 minutes ascending that rope up to the anchor point, and then you just clip into the high line, and you kind of like drag yourself off the high line. That is really hard to do because like you not only have to ascend a 70-meter rope, you then have to come out of this high line that's like angled pretty steep usually, with like 50 pounds of weight on you because of the ropes and like all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff. So it's pretty hard to do it that way, and also very inefficient. So if you've got, again, this is only if you have a small group. If you've got a big group, this is where the engineering gets really, really fun, because then we use a third rope, a bunch of pulley redirects, and we actually lower down a rope to the person that just jumped, and it's got like a knot and a ring on it, and they just clip into it. They clip into that. They let us know through a radio when they're clipped in and safe, and we literally pull them right back up to the cliff with like 20 people and a couple progress capture devices, and it takes like 3 minutes.
Kind of a block and tackle setup of some sort.
It's not even a block and tackle. It's just one rope redirected through a bunch of pulleys just to make it a clear straight line to them so it doesn't abrade on anything. And you don't really need block and tackle because if you've got 20 people all pulling,
Yeah,
you know
you can do
you
it.
you can very easily. So usually we have a runway behind the cliff of like 100 feet. Everyone just grabs onto the rope and just walks backwards 100 feet, and then you reset, and it's so fun to come up because you can feel some acceleration even coming up because your friends are pulling you so fast.
And then they all turn loose. Psych.
Yeah, then you just get a second rope jump for free, right?
Right. Holy cow. It just sounds so crazy to me, Alonso. I I guess I got to ask the question because I know there are listeners out there. It's like, why risk it? Why do it? What's the point?
It's it's the seeking the thrill, really. Like, thrill seekers is a very literal thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's honestly no other reason. You want to be in nature and all that stuff, but you also want to be like seeking some thrills and adrenaline sometimes. I tell people that, like, highlining isn't an adrenaline sport, but rope jumping definitely is. 100%.
Definitely
I
is.
I couldn't say I've ever once just felt like peaceful rope jumping. I've always definitely felt like amped up and like my heart was gonna beat out of my chest.
Wow. Well, how many jumps have you done?
I think I've done about five now.
Five.
Five or six maybe. They're a lot of effort. They're like,
Yeah.
logistically, it's the most complicated thing to plan because you have to rig a whole highline system, and then you have to like put a rope on it. Everyone that you invite has to be fully committed to pulling everybody else back up, so they can't go get distracted and like do other beautiful things in the park. And it's like it's a big ask, right? It's like you're asking 20 people, 10 to 20 people, like, hey, I need you to be here for the next 2 days. You're going to get about like 10 seconds of action, but you're going to work pulling people up for 2 days
Yeah.
straight.
Wow.
And it's definitely a big ask.
It's one person jumping, but definitely a team sport.
Yes, big team sport.
That's kind of cool, though. And this came up with a highlining as well. The number of people it takes to string a rig this big. It's
Oh yeah, for a big one, it's definitely a community sport.
Yeah, and I like that in the sense that, man, why do you do this if it's not to be with your friends? You know?
Exactly. I mean, that's really the best part about it. Because can you imagine like spending a week out in the wilderness with just like people you didn't like? No technology. Like you're forced to like talk to them for entertainment. That'd be kind of awful, right?
Right. So choose your people wisely. That's what you're.
They have actually commercialized rope swinging a little bit. And I'm serious, if anyone wants to try it, check out Rope Swing Moab. I got to give those guys a shout out because they've done the most streamlined rope swings I've ever seen. And you can just show up, you buy a jump and you can experience a rope swing in Moab for, I think it's like $200 or something like that, which is, very reasonable to pay for something you can literally not do anywhere else in the world at a commercial grade, if that makes sense.
Right.
So go check out Rope Swing Moab, and if you want to see what a rope swing feels like.
That's crazy. Nuts. Okay, you also do tree nets, and you have a company even called Tree Net Weaves. But I bet you most people are saying, well, a tree net? What are we talking about now? What's a tree net? I've seen tents that set up on 3 trees. I've seen webbing that people make nets out of to make a platform up high in a canopy or even in a house that they can play around on. What is your version of this?
So the second thing you said is pretty accurate, actually. So imagine like a tree house, right? But there's no lumber being used at all. It's all like rope, webbing, and paracord. And we make platforms out of it, walls, tunnels, so you could get into other platforms higher up into the tree. And it just becomes this giant web of tree net, where it's like you can have a bunch of different platforms that you can hang out on. Some of them, like if they're big enough, they're bouncy like trampolines, so you could jump up and down and do flips and stuff. Essentially we're creating a giant spider web in the tree that you can play on, and they're so much fun. They're a lot of work, but they are so much fun.
Okay, when you say a lot of work, we're talking about setting up some of these high lines for days. How long does it take to set up these tree nets?
Definitely longer. So like some of my biggest projects have taken 2 months of collective effort. Where some of them can be done in like a couple of days if I'm working by myself, like a small one. But a bigger project, like for a big family, like on a ranch or something, I can take up to a month doing it. and that's with somebody else helping me. So like 2 people, about a month of work. That's like, the longest one I've ever done is 2 months of a single human's collective effort.
Wow. So, are you using webbing? What is
So
the material?
it depends. So the basic tree net is, first you have to outline it, right? You have to put the perimeter on it, as I call it, and that's static rope. And again, we like redundancy, so we use 2 strands of static rope around the trees. So you take a bundle of tree trunks that you want to rig a platform on, right? And you literally just wrap them with a static rope. And then, you have to protect the trees, and like you have to use Tree Pro and all that stuff. But once you got that, you tension it really tight with some pulleys, and then you tie it together. So now you have a tensioned perimeter. And that, then you just fill it in with paracord. So we take a bunch of paracord and we just start stringing it up, until the holes are small enough so that nobody's foot is going to fall through them.
How much paracord are we talking about here? This is huge.
Yeah, like I said, for that really, really big one we did, I want to say we used like somewhere between 30 to 40,000 feet of paracord.
Miles and miles and
Oh
miles
yeah,
and miles of paracord.
So it depends, like a very small project, you might use about 4,000 feet, but a real big project, I've heard of some companies using over 100,000 feet of paracord for their projects.
100,000. We're talking about 20 miles
A lot
of
of paracord. A lot of paracord, yeah.
Dang, that's wild. So what does it look like with some of these bigger projects?
So it all depends on square footage, right? It per square foot, it takes about 30 to 40 feet of paracord to fill that 1 square foot in with small enough holes so that nobody's foot is going to fall through. So take 30 feet of paracord equals 1 square foot of space, right? Now figure out the square footage of whatever you're trying to do, and sky's the limit. You can go as big as you want, you can go as small as you want. Obviously bigger's cooler, better. Like if you can actually move around and like run on your platforms and jump and do flips and stuff, you're going to have a lot more fun than like if you're constrained to like a tiny little nook where you can only sit and like hang out. Yeah, it just kind of depends. Like some people want just a big platform that they could jump around on. Other people want to go like really high up into their trees, so we do a bunch of smaller platforms to get there. And other people want like a combination of both, It's a cool thing because it's sky's the limit with your creativity, and if you're a good rigger, you got some engineering background, which I do. You can do so many things with this craft.
Interesting. How long do they last? I mean, it takes a long time to get it up there. How long is it going to be viable?
So this is another one of those like kind of like little tricky gray areas, right? Because you should follow the manufacturer recommendation for things, right? And a manufacturer is always going to tell you, even if your rope has been sitting in a closet, you should retire it after 10 years, right? Obviously, a lot of people have kind of disproven that, and like they show that it still has a very high strength rating, but for liability reasons and stuff, manufacturers say that, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm the same way. So like with my own company, I tell people that they're going to get about 5 to 7 years, but that's also kind of a bogus figure, if you know what I mean. Like they can really get much, much, much longer than that if, they don't care to follow the manufacturer recommendations. And it depends on UV exposure. So if they're rigged somewhere wide open where there's no canopy of leaves above them or anything, and they're constantly getting beat on by the UV, then that 5 to 7 years is probably accurate. If they're well shaded and the conditions of which they're set up in is ideal, and they're only seeing sunlight maybe like a couple hours a day, then these things can easily get 10 plus years of life out of them.
Amazing. At first, I was thinking something along the idea of we're going to have a party and we're going to set this up for the party so everyone can enjoy this, and but what you're talking about is more like no, this is a tree house you can raise your family with.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. This isn't like a setup for a weekend and you're done kind of thing. This is a like, it's like it's a tree house essentially. Like you want it to stay there as long as possible, and you want your kids to grow up in it. Like if we set this up when your kids are like 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
That tree net is ideally going to be there until those kids go off to college, like 10 to 12 years later, right? Or like
That's wild.
at the very least till they're like teenagers and they don't even care to play in tree houses anymore.
Well, it's a lot of fun. What gave you the idea to do this?
It's a gateway drug from highlining, actually. What initially gave me the idea was a long time ago. So when I was first getting into slacklining really seriously, we have something called a space line. And so picture this with me, right? Like a slack line is normally just a piece of webbing strung between two trees, right? Goes in a straight line. Now, imagine three slack lines coming from three different trees in like a triangle shape, all meeting up at a point in the middle.
Okay.
And like, you and two of your friends can each walk one of the three slack lines. And you guys affect each other's up and down motions, but because you have a point in the middle, kind of canceling all the left and right motions, it's still very easy to walk with two other people walking at the same time as you.
It's great.
And then when one of them falls, you kind of get like launched up in the air a little bit.
Right.
But what we started figuring out was, well, what if we weave a net, like a triangular net, that all three of these slack lines can meet up in the middle, and then we'll just walk out onto this like really cool hangout zone in the middle where we can chill and like basically have a hammock strung between three slack lines. And that was just like the very initial idea for me. I built one net for that purpose and realized, wow, this is really cool, just like filling in this space with paracord and becoming a little spider and stuff. And that was like the initial seed. And what really pushed it over the top for me was when COVID happened and we didn't have anything better to do, we would go to the park and we started weaving a giant net. Like I'm talking like a 50-foot by 50-foot by 50-foot triangle that we would weave between like four of us for a couple hours a day, just because we were bored and everything was shut down. And just really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the process. And then lo and behold, someone reached out to me because they saw me doing it on social media, and they're like, "Hey, can like you build one of these for me? Like I'll pay you for it." And I was like, "Oh wow, yeah, I guess this could be a business kind of a thing."
This is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're weaving this, I think anyone that's messed with ropes much, they get this vision of you got to pull a lot of line through a knot or a lot of line through a weave or something, and it could get tangled up. You're trying to untangle. How do you manage it so that it's not just overwhelming?
So yeah, when I talk like when I was talking like 20,000, 30,000, even 100,000 feet of paracord,
yeah,
it's not like you're just taking like 100,000 foot piece of paracord. I mean, obviously, right? You're not just taking like 100,000 foot piece of paracord and like weaving that, right? You're usually doing it in like 20 to 30 foot segments where you cut a 30-foot piece of paracord off, you tie an end, and then you weave it around till you run out of those 30 feet, and then you tie the end, and then you start over with another piece. So it's actually not that bad as far as getting tangled, because you're only pulling like 20 feet of cord through a little hole at any given moment, and really that's only like 3 arm lengths if you really think about it.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's fun. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to do a high line with this weave on it, and you're going to be 600 feet in the air and half a mile out.
Oh no, yeah, that's already a thing actually. Like people have gotten married on these nets, like out in Moab. Like they'll make a big one, right? String it up between a bunch of high lines, and yeah, it's called a space net, and it's a really cool hangout thing. And then like, yeah, so that's you see that in your like Google Images one day, and it's like it's even more inspiration to get into this craft because it's such a cool thing.
How many people can be on these at one time?
As strong as the anchors are. So if you're rigging these out in space and you've got really really beefy anchors and webbing, I've seen up to 20 people on these at one time.
Just have to make sure you know what the rating for the anchor is.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're using bolts, it's a little bit easier to kind of figure out because we know the like average strength of a bolt. But when you're using trees, that's when it's kind of like a little more ambiguous because a tree can look super healthy and super strong, but like you never really know what's going on down in the roots, right? Like you never really know if it's got some loose soil or whatever, like there's always trees are living things, so they're much harder to gauge than a non-living thing like a bolt in a rock, right?
Yeah. I was building a house, and I dug a trench for the phone and the electric lines to go through, and I cut a little 2-inch root of a tree, just one root of a tree. And when we came back the next day, the tree was on the ground.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about. It's crazy. Like one little thing to a tree, and the wrong little thing, and that could be it for that tree, Because I bet that tree had like a bunch of other roots that you probably thought was no big deal to cut that root. You're like, oh yeah, this tree will be fine. It'll use all its other roots and it'll live.
Yeah, but that one root was under tension. We didn't know it, but it was under tension, holding up the whole tree. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy sometimes. Exactly. And that's a great way to like visualize it, that like you just don't know what's keeping that tree there, You don't know how deep those roots go. You don't know where they're pulling, or when the soil's good. Like there's so many things, and I'm not an arborist by any means, or I don't know my soil that well. I didn't study biology, so it's a little bit harder for me to gauge personally. So I have a rule of thumb where like if the tree's not at least 2 feet in diameter and looks healthy, I'm not going to use that tree.
Yeah. You got to do a lot of overkill for all the eventualities. Where can people see these things if they want to see what you're talking about?
I have a website actually, so www.treenetweaves.com. Treenet is one word, weaves is another, and I put all my work up there. I've got blogs on there that teach people how to do this thing, and I've also got a YouTube channel on that subject. I think we're just around 16,000 subscribers now. Where I actually teach people how to make their own tree nets.
That's a lot of fun. We have a little bit of time left. I would like to hear about some big wall climbing. That's something we didn't cover in the last interview at all, and it's kind of its own animal. I mean, I talk to a lot of people say, I love rock climbing. And then you find out, well, they're top roping, which is super cool. But it's not the same,
You're right. When's the last time we talked? Was it, what month was that?
It was still cold.
So it was before the new year?
It's cold still, but I'm gonna say it was 2 months ago.
2 months ago. Okay, so yeah, actually, I think it's a good time for this because I just climbed the nose of El Capitan actually.
Wow.
About a month ago. So funny story. I was supposed to go skiing, and the weather turned out to be absolutely cruddy for skiing. There was like no snow this year. It was a terrible snow year.
Yeah.
And I called one of my main climbing partners, and she's got a very flexible schedule, and I was like, hey, this is super last minute, and this was like a Wednesday, by the way. And on like a Wednesday, I was like, this is super last minute, but would you want to go climb the nose of El Capitan like tomorrow? And she just said, yes, I'm down. I'll be right over. And she like packed her stuff and came. And it's kind of funny. We showed up in Yosemite Valley, and it's February, like very early February. It was actually like the last days of January. So it's cold. It's very cold. And there was nobody there. Like normally when you pull up to a rock like El Capitan, there's like sometimes hundreds of cars lined up, and like half of those cars are like from climbers who are like on the wall or like climbing somewhere else. Point is, there's usually a lot of traffic on this wall. We didn't see a single car anywhere in sight, and we We get out of the car and it's freezing. We got these like giant puffies on, and we immediately started kind of doubting whether we had made a good decision or not, because we're like, this is a lot colder than I thought it was going to be up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the snow is cruddy, but that doesn't mean that like we can just go climbing. And so nobody on the wall, and we're immediately intimidated because we're like, I think we're doing something dumb here. But let's walk over there, and then we'll see. It's cold here, but like, let's go touch the rock. And typically, a rock is really good at absorbing heat and or staying cold. It's like sometimes it's really hard for a rock to warm up, so you can just touch a rock and you'll instantly know, like, if it zaps all the heat out of your hand, that like, oh, I probably shouldn't be climbing this thing because my fingers are just going to be frozen the whole time. We walk up, it's like 8 a.m. We put our hand on the rock, and lo and behold, it is warm. Wow. Despite the really cold weather around us, the rock is doing a really good job at like absorbing the radiation from the sun and staying warm. And we immediately were like, oh no, this is a good decision. This is going to be a lot of fun. And we spent 3.5 days on the wall in winter, all by ourselves. Man. It was quite a once in a lifetime experience, I think, to have the most popular route in the world, all to ourselves.
Goodness. So you did the whole bivvy thing up on the wall for how many nights?
So we spent 2 nights on the wall proper and 1 night on the ground right next to the wall.
Wow. Did it stay warm that whole time?
The wall was definitely warm. We had a great time while we were climbing. The only times we were a little bit cold were early in the morning because we started climbing at like 5 a.m. every day. So those first couple hours when it was still dark, it was a little cold, but nothing crazy, honestly. I was pleasantly surprised.
Explain the process of getting up a wall this size. What pitches are and how you belay each other and how you stay safe.
Oh, there's so much to dive into. But the general, most basic concept is, so you start on the ground, right? And you got, the wall's 3,000 feet tall, right? And your rope is like 200 feet long. So obviously you can't just climb from the ground to the top right. And then like pull your partner out. That's not how it works. So we do it in something called pitches. Every route has a different number of pitches depending on how tall it is and how much it wanders and things like that. So a pitch will typically be somewhere between 100 to 200 feet. And you climb up to the length of this pitch. You anchor yourself in. There's usually bolts on the wall. And if there's not bolts, you use the cracks and you put in your own gear to make yourself safe. And you make an anchor. So you've now climbed a pitch with the rope and you've made an anchor. And then you can pull your partner up usually. And all you do is, you belay them from the top. You take all the slack out of the rope and you're kind of pulling the slack out of the rope as they're climbing, right? But for big wall climbing, it's actually completely different. So everything's the same up until the point where you climb up and you make your anchor. But instead of pulling your second person up, you just tie their rope off. And they actually ascend it with handheld ascenders and nylon ladders and stuff. So once you've tied their rope safely, you don't even have to worry about them. You actually have a much harder job to do now, because if you think about it, we're spending 3 days on this wall, right? That means you need to bring up enough water, food, you need to have sleeping bags and you need to have your toiletries because you need to poop. And so, we're carrying poop up the wall and like all this stuff. So we have this big green bag. It's about 120 liters big. And that thing weighs like 50 pounds. And with a completely separate rope, a static rope usually, you put it into a rope capture device, and instead of pulling up your partner, you're pulling up this big green bag, and you're literally dragging that thing up the wall. So like it's a hard thing to do, you're pulling 50 pounds of weight up the wall. It's dragging up the wall, so there's a bunch of friction and all this stuff. And it's, you're doing that. You're doing that till you get it all the way up there. And once the bag and your partner are all up there, you start over and do it again. It's actually a really slow process when you include a haul bag on the journey.
How hard is it to set up your bivouac without dropping stuff and getting it right? And I mean, I can imagine at the end of a hard climbing day, you're cold, you're ready for food, you're ready for your sleeping bag, and you've got a lot of work left to do.
Yeah, so there's two ways to do the bivy. So we were fortunate that there was nobody on the route, right? There's a couple natural bivouacs on the wall, meaning that there's like a physical rock ledge that's big enough for you and your partner and all your stuff to fit on. Normally, what you have to do, you have to bring up something called a portaledge. It's basically a metal frame. It's big enough. It's a metal rectangular frame, big enough for you and your partner to fit on, and it's got like a nylon cloth that's tensioned between all those metal poles, and you're literally like on a sky platform sleeping.
Yeah.
And you hook this up to your anchor, and you got to adjust all the different legs just right so that like it's perfectly level and you're not like falling off the thing. And then you got to make sure that like every single thing you've got up there is like clipped into something so that if you happen to drop it, it doesn't actually fall into the abyss. It's really hard, even with a lot of experience, to keep everything in check. And we definitely dropped a couple things on our ascent up the nose, but yeah, the whole bivouac thing it's honestly arguably the most part. Like, you're sleeping 1,000 feet up in the air with one of your best friends, and you're enjoying like a nice hot ramen meal at the end of the day together. It's like there's no better feeling than watching the sunset with like 1,000 feet below you, and you just got a nice hot bowl of soup in your hand.
I have to point out again, it is winter. It's in the winter time too. Brr, dude. It just sounds cold.
It was cold. But we're pretty well adapted to the cold in that regard. So it honestly wasn't even as big of a deal as I thought it was gonna be. We each brought like multiple big puffy jackets, and we like rarely use them. I think we used them maybe for like an hour in the very late evening each, and that was about it.
Wow. Well, it sounds fascinating, and I don't know how many people have done that versus how many people haven't, except that most people might see it from a distance and just go, wow. That's out there.
It's a dying art, actually, believe it or not. So I don't know how familiar you are with the like progression of climbing. I'll just throw this out there real quick before I'm going to try to like be quick about this, but the movie Valley Uprising, if you haven't seen it, check it out, because that details like the entire history of climbing in Yosemite specifically, but like, Yosemite is the birthplace of climbing, so it's like a pretty good indicator as to how the sport has evolved. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, like the gear, it wasn't that great, and like the protection wasn't good, and even like the climbing shoes, they weren't that great. So performance wise, like people weren't really climbing that hard. So the way they got up walls is they relied on their gear. They hammered pitons into the cracks, and like they pulled their gear up on ropes. And even for like a more basic climb of today, they spent many days going up these walls. Like I don't know how long it took the first team to ascend the northwest face of Half Dome, but it was a lot of nights. You know what I mean? Yeah. And now people are going up that thing in like 10 hours. So like they don't even spend the night on the wall usually. So because that's where the sport is trending. Like the sport is trending to like more performance, more speed. People don't really want to spend nights on the wall because I was explaining to you how you have to haul that big haul bag up with all your water and stuff. People hate doing that, and for a good reason. It's hard. So most people nowadays are just like completely skipping that part of the process, and they're just getting stronger so that they can climb faster, so that they can get up walls in a day and like not have to worry about bivvying, and like they can come back down and shower and like sleep in a real bed.
Yeah.
It's definitely a dying art. People are less excited about big wall climbing and spending multiple nights on a wall than they are about just moving really, really fast and efficient through that same wall and not spend a night on the wall.
Right. Still sounds good though. Something about just being up there, I interviewed a lady years ago She called it adventure sleeping, and she just liked to find really unique places to spend the night. And it was actually a really fun interview. She traveled the world looking for places to sleep that people just wouldn't expect, you know? And hanging 1,000 feet off the ground is one of those places. Even though people have done a lot of it, it's still fascinating.
It's so fun. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, Alonso, that was fun to catch up with you, to hear the rest of the story that we didn't get the first time, and you're doing a lot of really, really fun stuff. How can people learn more?
Man, I mean, I think the easiest thing is just follow me on Instagram. My username is Alonso_Skyriguez, like Rodriguez, but with the word sky.
Sky instead of Rod.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Alonso, thank you again. You have to catch up again next time you do something big and outrageous. Gotta learn more about it. But anyway, hey, everybody out there, I know that Alonso, I mean, he's inspiring, just the stuff he's putting together. I think it's so cool. But find your own thing, and it may not be a kilometer walking 600 feet through the air on a 1-inch wide piece of webbing, and it may not be sleeping 1,000 feet above the ground, but find your own adventure, and make sure you do get out there and have some fun.
Well said.